The first thing I heard that morning was my own name spoken like an accusation. Margaret, you need to sign this, today. I was standing barefoot on the cold kitchen tile, my hand wrapped around a chipped white mug that said, "World's Best Grandma." It had been a Christmas gift from my granddaughter 5 years earlier, back when I was still invited to Christmas. The coffee inside trembled as my hand shook, not from age, but from the way my daughter-in-law's voice sliced through the room. I didn't look at her right away. I already knew the expression on Claire's face: tight smile, arms crossed, that look that said I was inconveniencing her simply by existing. "I want to read it first," I said. She scoffed. "It's just paperwork, you're always so dramatic." Behind her, my son Daniel leaned against the counter scrolling on his phone. 48 years old, my only child. The boy I raised alone after his father died in a factory accident. The boy who once held my hand so tightly he cried when I let go. He didn't look up. The papers on the counter were neatly stacked, clipped together, already signed by someone else. I caught a glimpse of the title before Claire slid them closer to me. Durable power of attorney. My stomach dropped. "Why would I need this?" I asked quietly. Claire's smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Because you're not getting any younger, Margaret, and we need to be prepared. You forget things. You get tired. It's just responsible." I looked at Daniel. "Did you know about this?" He shifted his weight, still not meeting my eyes. "It's just in case, Mom. Claire's right. It doesn't mean anything bad." That was when I understood something fundamental had already changed. This wasn't about planning. It was about control. I set the mug down carefully, afraid that if I didn't, I might throw it. "This house," I said slowly, "is still mine." Claire laughed, sharp and humorless. "For now." The words hung in the air like smoke. For now. 15 seconds. That's all it took for my world to tilt. I had invited them to move in 3 years earlier, right after my retirement party. I still remember the applause from my coworkers, the cake shaped like a sewing machine, the speech I gave about finally resting. Daniel hugged me that night and said, "You won't be alone anymore, Mom." Another lie I chose to believe. At first, having them in the house felt like company. Noise. Life. Claire cooked elaborate meals and called me Maggie in that faux affectionate way that felt rehearsed. Daniel fixed the porch light. We ate dinner together. I told myself this was family, but slowly things disappeared. My chair in the living room moved to the basement because it was too bulky. My photos replaced with abstract art Claire bought online. My name on the mailbox removed because it looked cluttered. Then the comments started. "Must be nice to not work anymore. You wouldn't understand modern finances. Maybe you should let us handle things now." I swallowed every word. I told myself this was the price of not being alone. I told myself my son would step in if things went too far. He didn't. The night before the paperwork appeared, I overheard them talking in the bedroom across the hall. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was getting water. "She doesn't even know how much the house is worth," Claire said, her voice low and amused. "Once everything's signed, it'll be easier. If she resists, we can always say she's confused." Daniel sighed. "Just don't make this ugly." Ugly. I stood there in the dark, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it. Now standing in my kitchen, staring at a pen placed deliberately in my hand, I realized something else. They thought I was already gone. I slid the papers back across the counter. "I'm not signing anything today," I said. Claire's eyes hardened. "You're being difficult." "No," I replied, surprising even myself with how steady my voice sounded. "I'm being careful." Daniel finally looked up. There was irritation in his eyes, impatience. "We'll talk about this later," he said. "You're tired." That was when I knew. Later was when they would finish me. As Claire gathered the papers and walked out of the kitchen, she paused at the doorway and looked back at me. "You should think about what's best for everyone," she said softly. The door closed behind her. I stood alone in the kitchen, the clock ticking loudly on the wall I had painted myself 27 years earlier. For the first time since my husband died, I wasn't afraid of being alone. I was afraid of what would happen if I stayed silent one day longer. And somewhere deep inside me, something old and patient began to wake up. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house felt like a warning. Every shadow on the ceiling looked like a countdown. I lay in bed staring at the faint crack in the plaster above me, the one Daniel made when he was 10, and threw a baseball inside despite my warnings. I never fixed it. I liked the reminder. By 3 in the morning, I had made a decision. If they were planning my disappearance, I would make sure I was seen. I got out of bed and opened the cedar chest at the foot of my mattress. The smell of old paper and lavender filled the room. Inside were things no one had touched in decades: deeds, receipts, letters, proof. I had bought this house in the early 90s with money from 2 jobs and a life insurance check that felt like blood money. I never put Daniel's name on it because a lawyer once told me gently, "Protect what you build, even from the people you love." At the time, I thought he was being cynical. I pulled out the original deed, my name typed clean and clear: Margaret Ellis, sole owner. I sat on the bed holding it, my hands steady now, my fear replaced by something colder: resolve. The next morning, I acted as if nothing had changed. I made eggs. I folded laundry. I smiled when Claire criticized the way I loaded the dishwasher. I nodded when Daniel reminded me about my doctor's appointment as if he were my parent and not my child. But I watched. I listened. And I remembered every slight I had once convinced myself didn't matter. The way Claire referred to the house as ours when talking to her friends. The way Daniel stopped calling my room upstairs and started calling it your space. The way bills I used to pay quietly shifted to a shared account I didn't recognize. That afternoon, I took the bus across town to see someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Judith Klein. We met when our sons played on the same little league team. She was sharp, even then, the kind of woman who noticed details other people missed. After her divorce, she went back to school, became a paralegal, then a lawyer. We lost touch after Daniel's wedding. Claire didn't like her. I wondered now why. Judith opened the door, took one look at my face and said, "Come in. You look like someone trying not to scream." We sat at her kitchen table, sunlight spilling across stacks of legal files. I told her everything: the paperwork, the conversations, the way my own son looked through me as if I were furniture. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she leaned back and folded her arms. "They're trying to box you in," she said, slowly, legally, "and they think you're too tired to fight back." I swallowed. "Can they do it?" "Not without your signature," she replied. "And not without consequences if they try." I slid the deed across the table. Judith smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Good. This gives us leverage." Us. The word settled in my chest like a promise. She outlined my options carefully. Updating my will, revoking any documents I hadn't signed but that referenced me, documenting verbal abuse, recording conversations in my own home, protecting assets before someone else tried to redefine them. "You don't confront them yet," she said. "You let them underestimate you." I nodded. I had been underestimated my entire life. I knew how to use that. When I returned home, Claire was on the phone, laughing loudly. Daniel was in the garage. No one asked where I'd been. That night, as I passed their bedroom, I heard Claire say, "She'll come around." They always do. I stopped in the hallway, my hand resting against the wall I had once painted while pregnant, exhausted, and hopeful. Always. I walked back to my room, closed the door, and placed the recorder Judith had given me into the pocket of my cardigan. They thought this was a waiting game. They had no idea I had already started counting moves. And the next time Claire told me to sign something, I wouldn't just say no. I would make sure she understood exactly whose house she was standing in. By the end of the first week, I realized something unsettling. Claire was getting bolder. It started with small things. She began opening my mail by accident. She moved my medications from the kitchen drawer to a box in the hall closet because she said it looked safer. She asked me twice a day if I remembered to eat, always with witnesses nearby, always loud enough for Daniel to hear. Each question was a needle. Each gesture was a brick in a wall they were quietly building around me. I recorded everything. The recorder stayed in my cardigan pocket, warm against my ribs like a second heart. Every time Claire spoke to me in that syrupy, condescending tone, I pressed the button. Every time she sighed dramatically and said things like, "We've talked about this, Margaret," or, "You already asked me that, remember, I captured it." Daniel noticed none of it. Or worse, he noticed and chose comfort over truth. One evening, while I was setting the table, Claire leaned against the counter and watched me struggle slightly with a heavy stack of plates. She didn't offer to help, she just watched. "You know," she said casually, "my cousin works with elder care facilities. Really nice places. Structured. Safe." I didn't look at her. "That's good." "She says families wait too long. They feel guilty." Then something bad happens. I set the plates down slowly. "Are you suggesting something?" She smiled. "I'm just thinking ahead. Someone has to." Daniel walked in, then loosening his tie, thinking about what? "Your mom's future," Claire said smoothly. "We all want what's best for her." I turned and looked at my son, really looked at him. "When did my future stop being my own?" I asked. He frowned. "Mom, don't start." "Don't start." as if my life were an argument he didn't have time for. That night, I went through my room and took inventory: jewelry, documents, bank statements. I realized how much of myself I had already shrunk to fit their lives. How many decisions I had quietly handed over because it felt easier than being alone. Judith called me the next morning. "They pulled a credit report on you," she said. My breath caught. "How? Your name? Your address? They didn't succeed, but the attempt itself is telling." That was the moment fear finally turned into anger. I wasn't just being disrespected, I was being erased. 2 days later, Claire invited her parents over for dinner. She didn't ask me, she informed me. "They're excited to see the house again," she said. I told them how lucky we are. That afternoon I cooked out of habit: roast chicken, mashed potatoes. A life spent feeding others is hard to unlearn. The dinner was polite on the surface. Her father talked about the stock market. Her mother complimented the curtains Claire had chosen. No one asked how I was. At one point, Claire laughed and said Margaret gets confused sometimes, but she's still very sweet. Her mother nodded sympathetically. "Oh, that happens." I felt the table tilt. I smiled and said nothing. But later, as I cleared the plates, Claire said it. Right in front of them. "We'll need to make some decisions soon, for her safety." That night alone in my room, I played back the recordings. Hearing it all together was like listening to a slow, deliberate crime. I sent copies to Judith. She replied with one sentence: "We're almost there." I didn't know what there looked like yet, but I knew one thing. They were no longer waiting for me to disappear. They were trying to push me, and I was done pretending not to feel the hands at my back. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Certified mail, addressed to me. Claire brought it into the living room, waving it slightly as if it were a harmless thing. "Looks important," she said. "Probably something medical." I took it from her without answering. My hands were steady. My heartbeat was not. Inside was a notice from a financial institution I had never heard of, informing me that an application for asset management had been initiated in my name but could not be completed due to missing authorization. Missing my authorization. I looked up slowly. Claire's face was carefully neutral, too carefully. "What is this?" I asked. She shrugged. "I don't know. These companies mess up all the time." I nodded and folded the letter. "I'll have Judith look at it." The name hit her like a slap. "Judith," she repeated. "My lawyer." The silence stretched. "You hired a lawyer?" Claire asked. "I consulted one," I said calmly. "It's my right." Daniel stood up from the couch. "Mom, you're making this bigger than it needs to be." "No," I replied. "I'm finally seeing how big it already is." That night, Judith called me and didn't bother with pleasantries. "They tried to initiate control over your assets," she said. "Without you. That's not concern, that's manipulation." "What do we do now?" I asked. "We stop playing defense." She outlined the next steps clearly. A revised will, immediate revocation of any implied authority, formal letter sent, documentation prepared. "And Margaret," she added, "you need witnesses." The opportunity came sooner than expected. 2 days later, Claire announced a small gathering. Friends from her yoga studio. Daniel's coworker and his wife. Casual, social, harmless. I knew better. As people filled the house, Claire poured wine and laughed loudly, playing the gracious hostess. My house. Her performance. At one point in the kitchen, she raised her voice deliberately. "Margaret, didn't you already take your pills? You don't want to double dose again." Every head turned. I felt heat rise in my chest. I pressed the recorder. "I haven't taken anything," I said clearly, "and you know that." She smiled tightly. "See, defensive, that's what I mean." I looked around at the faces watching me, curious, awkward, silent. "This is my home," I said, "and I am capable." Claire laughed lightly. "Of course you are. No one's saying otherwise." But the damage was done. Later that night, when the guests had left and Daniel had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table alone. I played back the recording. Claire's voice, my voice, the pause after. It was all there. Judith arrived the next morning with papers and fire in her eyes. "We're done waiting," she said. "It's time to confront this before they rewrite your life entirely." I looked around the kitchen. The same kitchen where I had once planned birthdays, sewn costumes, helped with homework. "I don't want revenge," I said quietly. "I want my life back." Judith nodded. "Sometimes those are the same thing." I didn't sleep much that night either. But for the first time, it wasn't because I was afraid of what they might do. It was because I knew what I was about to do next. And once I did it, there would be no going back. The confrontation didn't happen the way I imagined. I thought it would be loud, explosive. A single moment where everything cracked open and the truth spilled out all at once. Instead, it began quietly with a knock on the front door at 9 in the morning, and Judith stepping inside with a leather folder tucked under her arm. Claire was still in her robe scrolling on her phone. Daniel was already gone to work. Perfect timing. Judith didn't sit down. She placed the folder on the dining table and opened it with deliberate care as if performing a ritual. Margaret has updated her will, she said calmly, effective immediately. Claire laughed. Okay, that's her right. Yes, Judith agreed. And she has also formally revoked any implied authority present or future that you may have attempted to establish over her finances, healthcare, or property. Claire's smile froze. I don't know what you're talking about. Judith slid the certified letter across the table. Then another, then another. Attempted asset management. Unauthorized credit inquiry. Recorded verbal statements indicating intent to establish incapacity. I watched Claire's face change in slow motion. Confusion gave way to irritation. Irritation to anger. You recorded me, she snapped, turning toward me. In my own home, I said, where I am legally allowed to. You sneaky old... Judith raised a hand. Careful. Claire crossed her arms. This is ridiculous. Daniel knows I'm just trying to help. Daniel knows what you chose to show him, I replied. So do your friends. So do your parents. Her eyes narrowed. What does that mean? It means, Judith said evenly, that if this continues, these records become part of a formal complaint. Public, documented. The room went silent. Claire looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in years. You think you've won something, she said? You'll end up alone. I stood up slowly. My knees protested, but my spine didn't bend. I was alone when you lived here, I said. Now I'm just no longer pretending otherwise. That afternoon, Daniel came home early. Claire met him at the door, her voice shaking, her eyes already wet. She told him I was paranoid, that I'd turned against her, that Judith was manipulating me. He listened, nodded, looked tired. Then he came into the kitchen where I was sitting with a cup of tea and asked, Did you really record her? Yes. Why didn't you tell me things were this bad? I set the recorder on the table and pressed play. Claire's voice fills the room, calm, cold, calculating. Daniel's face drained of color. When it ended, he sat down heavily. She said these things. She meant them, I replied. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered, I didn't see it. No, I said gently, you didn't want to. That night, Claire slept on the couch. Daniel didn't sleep at all. I lay awake, listening to the house breathe, aware that something irreversible had happened. A line crossed. A door closed. But deep inside, beneath the fear and grief, there was a quiet sense of relief. I had chosen myself. And once a woman does that, she becomes very difficult to control. Claire didn't leave right away. Instead, she shifted tactics. The anger disappeared. The sharp edges softened. Suddenly, she was polite, careful, almost pleasant. She offered to make tea, asked how I was feeling, told Daniel she was worried about my stress levels. It was unnerving, Judith warned me. When manipulation fails, performance begins. I kept recording. Every apology laced with blame, every concern framed as sacrifice. I just want harmony, Claire said one evening, her voice trembling. I gave up so much to live here. I looked at her. You gave up rent. Daniel flinched. 2 days later, I received an email notification. My bank account had been accessed. Not withdrawn from, just accessed. Judith was on the phone within minutes. She's checking boundaries, she said, seeing what still works. That was the moment we escalated. Judith filed formal notices with the bank, my healthcare providers, and the county records office. Everything was locked down, alerts activated, permissions clarified in writing. Then she did something else. She sent a letter. Not to Claire. To Daniel. It outlined in unemotional legal language exactly what Claire had attempted, what evidence existed, and what potential consequences could follow if it continued. Daniel read it alone in his car, according to him. He came inside afterward and sat across from me at the kitchen table. I didn't marry who I thought I did, he said. No, I replied. But you chose to ignore what didn't fit the story you wanted. He nodded. Tears slid silently down his face. I don't know how to fix this. You don't fix it, I said. You decide who you stand with. That night they fought behind closed doors. I didn't listen. I didn't need to. The next morning, Claire packed a suitcase. She stood in the doorway, eyes red, jaw tight. You think this is karma, she said. But you're just a bitter old woman afraid of change. I smiled softly. No, I'm a woman who remembered her worth. She left without another word. Daniel moved into the guest room. The house felt strange, quiet, heavy, but it was mine again. Judith came by that evening with final paperwork. It's done, she said. She can't touch anything, ever. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. But as I sat alone later staring at the family photos still on the wall, I knew the story wasn't over. Because losing control doesn't end manipulation, it just changes its direction. And Claire wasn't the kind of woman who walked away empty-handed. Not without trying one last thing. Claire's last move came quietly. No shouting, no dramatic entrances, no midnight phone calls. Just an envelope slipped into my mailbox one gray Tuesday morning addressed in careful handwriting I recognized immediately. My name spelled correctly, no nickname, no affection. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a petition. She was challenging my mental competency. I sat at the kitchen table holding the page while the kettle screamed itself dry on the stove. My hands didn't shake, my chest didn't tighten. Instead, I felt a strange calm, the kind that comes when you've already walked through fire and recognized the smell of smoke. She had waited just long enough to make it look reasonable. According to the petition, I had shown signs of confusion, paranoia, emotional instability. According to her statement, she had only acted out of concern. According to the timing, this wasn't about reconciliation. It was about revenge. I called Judith. She finally did it, I said. Judith didn't sound surprised. Good. Good. Yes, she replied. Now she's exposed herself. Within hours, Judith had assembled a response that read less like a defense and more like an autopsy. Every recording, every attempted financial access, every witness statement, every inconsistency in Claire's narrative laid out in precise, unemotional language. She's claiming you're unstable, Judith said, while also claiming you're capable enough to sign documents when it suits her. Judges don't like that. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Daniel didn't take it well. She's trying to have you declared incompetent, he said, pacing the living room. This is insane. No, I replied, this is desperation. He stopped pacing and looked at me. I should have stopped this sooner. Avoiding eye contact, the old habit. I'm not interested in guilt, I said, only truth. The days leading up to the hearing were strangely peaceful. I kept my routines, morning walks, tea at noon, sewing in the afternoon. I documented everything. I rested when I needed to. I lived deliberately. Claire, on the other hand, unraveled. She sent Daniel messages accusing me of manipulation, of brainwashing him, of stealing her future. She called my sister, whom she had never liked, to warn her that I was declining mentally. She posted vague quotes online about betrayal and toxic parents. Judith collected it all. The night before the hearing, Daniel knocked on my door. I'm scared, he admitted. So am I said, but not of her. The courtroom smelled like old paper and furniture polish. Claire sat on one side with her attorney, perfectly dressed, eyes red enough to suggest suffering, but not enough to suggest weakness. I sat beside Judith, my hands folded, my back straight. When Claire spoke, she cried. She talked about concern, about confusion, about sleepless nights worrying about my safety, about how I didn't understand modern systems, about how I had turned hostile. Then Judith stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She simply played the recordings, one by one. The judge listened, expressionless, patient. Then Judith presented the paper trail. The failed attempts, the contradictions, the timeline. Finally, she handed the judge a simple document. My updated will. I'd like to point out. Judith said that Mrs. Ellis is competent enough to make detailed legal decisions when they remove control from the petitioner, but suddenly incompetent when she resists. Silence filled the room. The judge looked at Claire, long, hard. This petition is denied, he said, and I strongly advise you to reconsider further action of this nature. Claire didn't look at me as she stood, but I looked at her, and I felt nothing. The fallout was slower than the conflict. Claire didn't appeal. She didn't apologize either. She simply disappeared from our lives, leaving behind half-empty closets and a trail of bitterness that no longer reached me. Daniel filed for divorce 3 weeks later. He moved out shortly after, not because I asked him to, but because he said he needed to learn how to stand on his own without hiding behind anyone else. He rented a small apartment across town. We started meeting for coffee on Sundays. At first, the conversations were careful, polite, then real. I didn't know how easy it was to let someone else decide for me, he admitted one afternoon. I thought avoiding conflict meant being kind. It means being absent, I said gently. The house changed. Not dramatically. No renovations, no grand declarations, just small shifts. I moved my chair back into the living room, hung my photos again, put my name back on the mailbox. I started hosting a weekly sewing circle like I used to decades ago. Women my age, older, younger, stories stitched together between cups of tea and shared silence. Some of them had their own versions of Claire. Some were still quiet about it. I didn't push. One evening, Judith came by with a bottle of wine. You know, she said most people don't get to see karma work this cleanly. It didn't feel clean, I replied. No, she agreed, it felt earned. A month later, I received a message from Claire. Just one sentence. You took everything from me. I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. Because the truth was simpler. I hadn't taken anything. I had only refused to give it away. As winter settled in, I updated my routines again. Walks turned shorter, afternoons longer, reflection deeper. I rewrote my will one final time, not out of fear but clarity. I wasn't cutting anyone out. I was choosing intention. Daniel remained in my life, carefully, honestly, with boundaries we both respected. He never moved back in. He never assumed. He asked. And that mattered. Sometimes late at night, I would sit in the living room, the same room Claire once tried to claim, and think about how close I came to disappearing without ever leaving. Not dying, just fading. But here I was, present, heard, legally documented, emotionally intact. People talk about revenge like it's an explosion. Sometimes it's quieter than that. Sometimes it's simply standing your ground long enough for the truth to have nowhere else to go. And the most satisfying justice isn't watching someone fall. It's realizing you never needed them to stand in the first place. I thought the story would end with silence. With Claire gone, the legal dust settled, and Daniel rebuilding his life at a cautious distance, I expected peace to arrive like a curtain closing. Instead, peace came with questions, the kind that surface only after the noise stops. The first question arrived in the form of a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Ellis, a woman, asked, her voice professional but careful. My name is Laura Benton. I'm an attorney representing the estate of Henry Caldwell. The name hit me like a memory I hadn't touched in years. Henry Caldwell had been my brother-in-law, my late husband's older brother. Estranged, proud, wealthy. We hadn't spoken in over a decade. I'm listening, I said. There's been a revision to Mr. Caldwell's will, she continued, and you are named in it. I sat down slowly. Henry and I had never been close. After my husband died, Henry accused me of mismanaging money, of not pushing Daniel hard enough, of being too soft. He cut contact shortly after. I assumed I'd been written out of his life entirely. Apparently I was wrong. He passed away last month, Laura said, and left specific instructions that you be informed personally. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. When I told Daniel, his reaction surprised me. He hated you, he said bluntly. He hated what I represented, I replied. There's a difference. The lawyer's office was in a tall building downtown, all glass and steel. Laura greeted me with a firm handshake and led me into a conference room. She slid a document across the table. Henry had left me his lake house. Not Daniel, not a charity, me. The reason was written in a letter attached to the will. Margaret, you were the only one in this family who ever understood ownership, not just of property, but of self. I disapproved of your choices because they reflected what I lacked. When I watched what happened with your son's wife, I realized I had been wrong about you for years. Use the house well, or sell it. Just don't let anyone take it from you. I folded the letter carefully. What about Daniel, I asked. Laura hesitated. He was left a modest trust, but the house is yours outright. When I got home, I sat in my living room for a long time, absorbing the irony. A man who doubted me had seen me clearly in the end. Daniel struggled with it, not because of money, but because it forced him to confront another truth. People outside our immediate family had recognized my strength long before he did. I don't resent you, he told me eventually. I resent that it took losing everything for me to learn. I decided to keep the house, not as a retreat, but as a marker. I spent weekends there alone at first, walking along the water, sitting with memories that didn't belong to anyone else. The quiet felt earned. Then I invited others. Women from the sewing circle, widows, divorced women, women rebuilding after betrayal. The house filled with laughter, shared meals, late-night conversations about fear and freedom. Claire heard about it. I know because she sent another message. Must be nice to play the wise matriarch now. I didn't respond. Some lessons don't require an audience. The final confrontation came when I least expected it. At a grocery store, I was reaching for apples when I felt it. That familiar tightening in the chest. the sense of being watched. Claire stood 2 aisles over. She looked different, thinner, sharper, like someone who had been grinding her teeth for too long. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she walked toward me. "I heard about the lake house," she said, skipping pleasantries. "Congratulations." "Thank you," I replied. Her eyes flicked to my hands. No tremor, no hesitation. "You know," she said, lowering her voice, "if you hadn't interfered, things would have worked out better for everyone." I smiled gently. "For you." She scoffed. "You ruined my marriage." "No," I said. "I revealed it." Silence stretched between us. "I loved your son," she said suddenly. "I believe you," I answered. "In the way you know how." Her jaw tightened. "You think you're better than me." "No," I said. "I think I survived you." That landed. She stepped back as if struck. For the first time I saw it, not anger, not contempt, fear. Because people like Claire rely on silence, on endurance mistaken for weakness, and when that illusion breaks, there's nowhere to hide. "I hope it was worth it," she said. "It was," I replied. "Every moment." She walked away without another word. That night I sat in my living room again. My living room. The lamp I chose, the chair I reclaimed, the photos I restored. Daniel called later. "I signed the divorce papers," he said. "It's final." "I'm proud of you," I told him. "For what?" "For choosing honesty over comfort." We sat in silence on the phone for a while, the kind that doesn't ache. When I hung up, I wrote something in my journal. A line I wished I had learned sooner. Being kind does not require being small. The story wasn't over yet, I could feel that. Because rebirth doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in stages. And I was standing on the edge of the last one. Rebirth doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like waking up one morning and realizing you're no longer bracing yourself for impact. The first sign was my body. The tension I had carried for years, the tightness in my shoulders, the shallow way I breathed without noticing began to loosen. I slept through the night. I woke without dread. I stopped flinching when my phone rang. The second sign was my voice. I noticed it one afternoon at the lake house. A woman named Ruth, recently divorced after 35 years of marriage, asked me how I knew when it was time to stop trying to fix things. I didn't hesitate. "You stop when fixing costs you your dignity," I said. The words didn't feel borrowed, they felt lived in. The lake house became more than a place. It became a pause, a threshold. Women came for weekends. Some stayed quiet, some cried, some raged. No one was rushed. No one was told to forgive or forget or be grateful for survival. We talked about inheritance, not just money, but patterns. Silence passed from mother to daughter. Endurance mistaken for love. The myth that good women endure quietly. I told them my story not as a warning, but as proof. Proof that it's never too late to interrupt the cycle. Daniel visited, once hesitant, standing in the doorway like a guest in his childhood. He helped fix a loose step on the porch. We cooked dinner together. It was awkward at first, then easier. "I used to think strength meant keeping everyone happy," he said, staring at the water. "And now," I asked, "now I think it means living with the discomfort of telling the truth." I nodded. That was growth, slow, uneven, real. Before he left, he hugged me longer than usual. "I see you now," he said. That mattered more than any apology. Back home, I finalized the last revision of my will. Clear, detailed, intentional. Daniel remained included not as a default, but as a choice. Portions were set aside for causes that protected women who had been erased by family, by age, by quiet manipulation. I didn't do it out of bitterness. I did it out of alignment. One evening, as winter began to soften into spring, I found an old photo tucked behind a drawer. Me at 30, hair wild, hands dirty with paint, smiling like a woman who believed in the future without knowing how hard it would test her. I put the photo on the mantle, not to mourn her, to thank her, because she survived long enough for me to finish what she started. The last lesson arrived without drama. No lawyers, no courtrooms, no confrontations, just a knock at my door on a quiet Sunday afternoon. It was Ruth. She stood there holding a pie, her eyes brighter than the first day I met her. "I signed my lease today," she said. "My own place." I stepped aside and let her in. We sat at the table eating pie straight from the tin, laughing about nothing important. And I realized something as ordinary and extraordinary as breath. This was the victory, not Claire's downfall, not the court ruling, not the inheritance or the apologies or the reclaimed rooms. The victory was presence, being fully here, in my body, in my home, in my life. Claire never contacted me again. I heard through distant channels that she had moved cities, changed jobs, rewritten her story the way people like her always do. I wished her nothing, not harm, not forgiveness. Just distance. Daniel continued his slow rebuilding. We spoke often, honestly, without illusions. Sometimes love looks like boundaries held with tenderness. On my birthday, he gave me a small gift. A simple frame with a photo of the house taken from the street, my name clearly visible on the mailbox. I thought you'd like this, he said. I did. That night alone, I sat in the living room and reflected on the years I had almost lost. The years I nearly surrendered to the idea that aging meant shrinking, that love meant endurance, that peace required silence. None of that was true. Here is what I know now. Revenge doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like clarity, like refusing to disappear quietly, like choosing yourself without apology. If you are listening to this and something in your chest feels tight, if you've been made to feel invisible in your own family, your own work, your own life, hear this. It is not too late. Not too late to say no, not too late to ask questions, not too late to protect what you built, not too late to be seen. If this story resonated with you, if any part of Margaret's journey felt familiar, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what moment stayed with you the most. If you believe she made the right choices, please like this story. And if you want to keep hearing real stories about justice, dignity, and women who refuse to disappear, subscribe and stay with us, because your story isn't over yet, and neither is your voice.